Okay, I think we're ready.
Yes.
All right, let's do this. Good morning. My name is Stuart Sarkozy-Bonasi. Thank you for joining us. I'm the Global Director for Policy and Investments with the Resilient Cities Network, and appreciate you coming to have this important discussion on digitization, namely digital solutions for urban resilience. We have an excellent panel for the discussion, and I know when our time is up, you'll agree with that. Many thanks to our partners at Visa and to the Egyptian government for holding us here. Just a few background comments and introductions, and then we'll dig into the conversations. I want to make sure with the outside noise you can all hear me well. Great. And we're going to have opening remarks, and then each panelist, and then a series of questions, which will then open up to the audience for questions as well. It's an important conversation we're combining here in terms of digitization and resilience. So let me introduce you to our panelists. In the order of their opening remarks, we have Rajiv Garodia, the Senior Vice President and Global Head of Visa Government Solutions. Thank you, Rajiv, and thank you for the partnership. Next to Rajiv, we have Lauren Sorkin, our Executive Director for Resilient Cities Network. Just to my left here, Sergio Graf, the International Advisor to the Governor of Jalisco in Mexico on the Global Environment Agenda. And last but not least, from here locally, Dr. Mona Fayed, the Assistant Minister of Sustainable Development in the Egyptian Ministry of Planning and Economic Development. So many of you know that Resilient Cities Network is the leading, in reality, the only network focused directly on urban resilience for its members, its partners, and its supporters, and like everyone on stage today. And we're there for the broader movement. When we say resilience, we don't just mean surviving. We mean adapting, but probably more importantly, we mean thriving. And that's going to be part of the conversation today when we talk about resilience. And that means in the face of combining shocks and stresses, we're here for the thriving of people. The partnership that you'll hear about, digitization, and the panelists here on stage bring this into view this morning with all of you. And also when we refer to digitization and digital solutions, as you'll hear about, in the realm of city systems, we see this as a key means of attaining the kind of equitable, holistic resilience that we've just defined, because it's all shocks and stresses, and we talk about co-benefits a lot, and that's how we interface deeply with society, with infrastructure, transportation, education, economy, and business. In other words, the full resident and city well-being that we see as holistic resilience, and everyone on stage does as well. So Visa and Resilient Cities Network have embarked on a unique partnership, which you'll hear about in more detail. And this holds lessons for other nations and cities, networks, and partners. And that's something we hope we can highlight today and inspire. We're going to explore this partnership and what it means for the future of resilience. But we're also fortunate to have two levels of government with us, from Jalisco and from Egypt, to expand on that conversation and share their insights from the government side on digitization and resilience. So let's move to our first speaker for opening comments. Rajiv, over to you.
I think it's better with because that will be very. It's not easy to.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Louder.
Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Others have to be off for this to work. Okay. Just to quickly introduce myself, Rajiv Garodia. I look after the global government solutions at Visa. I'm based in London. And just to build on what friend Stuart just mentioned, uh, from Visa's perspective and resilience, we focus on two things. One is resilience and the digital resilience of cities, especially relating to small businesses. We just come through a pandemic and we've seen the impact, a disproportionate impact on small businesses across cities, uh, where it went, when the world went into lockdown, you found small businesses being disproportionately affected. And one of the big reasons was they were not digitally enabled to do business or accept payments when cash became dirty. And it was a big need which we saw during the whole pandemic. So we, as a company, we are very mission driven in terms of helping small businesses being digitally resilient in the world and times to come. And that's where this partnership is focusing a lot of its efforts in. The second thing we care about is the digitization of the government itself. As you know, we live in a world where a lot of interactions with the citizens and society have to be digitally enabled. And we work with governments around the world in few different areas in terms of making social disbursements, having more transparent procurement processes, how do they accept payments from citizens, and a whole bunch of collaborations in the area of sustainability and small businesses. So those are kind of two focus areas for us. And this partnership helped us bring both of those to life.
Thank you, Rajiv. And we'll dig
Yeah.
into some of
Yeah.
the details on that in a minute. Lauren, I'll turn it to you for your comments.
Thanks, Stuart. And it's such an honor to be here. I'm Lauren Sorkin, and I'm the Executive Director of Resilient Cities Network, which is the world's leading network for cities who are working to build holistic resilience. So we have nearly 100 members in 47 countries around the world. And we really have the privilege of working with partnership to achieve holistic resilience. Partners like Visa who understand that in order to build resilience, we have to have economic opportunity. And without equity, we cannot have resilience. When we think about what we all lived through in the last 2 years, COVID-19, it was our small and medium enterprises in our cities who suffered the most, who lost the most. And those communities, those vulnerable communities, are on the front lines of COVID, of pandemics. They are the same communities that are on the front lines of climate change. And so, in order to increase their resilience and their ability to withstand shocks and stresses, at the base of it is the need to create economic opportunity. And so, what we have been able to do, and I know we're going to dig into that more, is to create a program that really looks at the fabric of a city, what those cities' needs are, and how we can bring digital solutions into those pain points to alleviate them in a way that delivers multiple benefits. And I just want to say a few things about that and that approach. I think what enables resilient cities to work with our city members, like Guadalajara and Jalisco, like so many others around the world, is really two things. One is we invest in the long-term development of the city. We create resilience strategies which look at the city in a very holistic way. That's just one part of it. The even more important part is that we lead with people. We invest in people in cities so that a chief resilience officer leads a resilience agenda over time, that this goes beyond politics. It transcends politics, and it becomes a resilience vision for a city that then people around in the government, in different ministries and different departments, can help and play their part in building resilience. And that makes cities better partners for not just the private sector, but for other sectors, civil society, to come in and help build resilience together.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. Sergio, we'll move to you next and travel to Jalisco.
Yeah, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Let me start thanking the Resilient Cities Network and Visa for having us today. It is also an honor to be in COP27 in behalf of Enrique Alfaro, Governor of Jalisco, that is leading this ambition agenda on climate change action. And I am also representing our capital or metropolitan city of Guadalajara, that is including 9 mayors in this city. Well, regarding the question that you sent us, digital solutions are tools to advance on resilience, and to start making them a priority, it's important to strengthen institutional, programmatic, and legal framework with clarity on where we want to go. It's very important that to have that. Is have a very clearly program to climate change action in mitigation and adaptation, and to be more resilient. In Jalisco, we recognize that digitalization is key to the development transformation that we need, and how is accelerated resilience not just for climate action, but for sustainability, well-being, and even coming to society. In the past few years, we have worked as hard as we can, taking steps on this agenda, thinking to a Resilient City network. It's very important, the assistance in this agenda. Our government worked thoroughly with the Metropolitan Planning Institute of Guadalajara in design, planning, and implementation of territorial strategy. It's very important to know that Jalisco is the only state that have intermunicipal agencies to planning and implement action in territorial aspects in the metropolitan area, but in the interior of the state too. Guadalajara is a huge megalopolis that have more than 5 million inhabitants. If you say in the future in 2050, 70% of the people will be in cities. Well, Jalisco is living in the future. We are 82% of people living in cities, and that is very important, because in the cities is we can find the people will we suffer more in the world. It's very important to work in this agenda in the cities. And the Guadalajara city faced diverse challenges related to population growth, water demand, massive transport, urban development, and other things. And for Jalisco and Guadalajara, city transport is a sector with great opportunities. It is the first category of importance in our inventory of greenhouse gases emission, with about 30%, 42% of total greenhouse emissions in a strategy of mitigation. That's why the strongest and more ambitious part of the climate action plans are related to the transport agenda. In 2020, a third line of the urban electric train system of the city was inaugurated, and we have an executive project, and we initiate the project to develop the new line 4, for massive public transport. But we have another part of bigger policy called My Transporte, that includes a BRT system in the carway, a business model with more than 20 routes and 5,000 public transport units, a public share bicycle system in 3 municipalities interconnected between them. All of it has a potential mitigation of 4.8 million tons of CO2 equivalent. We have an electric bus line, a technical guidelines for regulation of movement and cargo and transport. A part of all of this part of a transport system that homologate the payment of different kind of mobility options, taking the opportunity to support a specific group of people with preferential costs for student, women, family chiefs, and elderly people. Today, I also have the pleasure to share with you our joint initiative with Visa and Resilient City Network for Transport System that contributes to the construction of more resilient public transport network, ultimately resulting in open payment in the integrated transportation system, My Mobilidad. This incredible project was developed jointly with Ministry of Transport in Jalisco, the Strategic Coordinator of Territory in Jalisco, and Resilient Cities and Visa. By incorporating open payments, the mobility system is creating more than better alternative for user, increasing the service efficiency and generating opportunity to reduce the environmental impact of public transport in the metropolitan area of Guadalajara. Not to mention that Jalisco becomes one of the few regions of Latin America to have an integrated transportation system with all digital payment, with more than 50% of electronic transaction, and will have in the next future open payment with this project, helping to bridge the gap between digital divide to advance urban mobility and resilience.
Thank you, Sergio. And it's clear why we have to bring business and government together. It's an amazing story. And last but not least, Dr. Monan, turn to you.
Well, good morning. It's a real pleasure to be joining you today and having you all at the Green City of Peace, Sharm el Sheikh, for the COP27. I also would like to extend my gratitude for the invitation by Visa and RCN and being part of such a very important event, discussing maybe two very interrelated elements in the recipe of achieving sustainable development. Just to give you a glimpse of what we're doing at the Ministry of Planning, I'm the Assistant Minister for Sustainable Development and the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development in Egypt. The ministry is working on, let's say, the national version of the Agenda 2030 and trying to cascade it down to sectoral strategies for several line ministries. We're also working on allocating investment funds to various projects. And this brings me to where these two important elements of digitalization and resilience come within our framework and our work. We have been updating the vision 2030, the Egyptian vision 2030, for various reasons. And among these reasons are to incorporate resilience, where resilience, we're not talking about resisting the circumstances or not being affected by them, but rather going through the crisis and its repercussions to be fully recovering, rebounding, and getting back on the right track. Where if there is lack of resilience, there will probably be lack of restoration. Digitalization is perceived as an important enabler and a tool that is being used across several strategies and several policies that are undertaken. Again, digitalization is not a luxury now. It used to be something luxurious. Whoever has access to digitalized services or digitalized any product, but now it's a necessity in life, decreasing transaction costs, producing efficiently, providing services in a very efficient way. So the government now perceives it as a very important enabler. It's in its sustainable development strategy. If we talk about investment now, investing in resilience has become another layer in investments beside investment in infrastructure and in human capital. Now, resilience is an important pillar that needs to be accounted for in our investment plans. I think this could be just an intro, and then we can discuss further as for the details that the ministry is utilizing digitalization. And thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So we have a series of questions we want to run through, and we want to make sure that anyone in the audience is welcome to also jump in. But I'm going to turn to Rajiv first and dig in a little bit further about what you started to say about the direction of Visa, its connection to resilience, how the work of digitization and what you're doing is building resilience, and what you see for the future in terms of how you build that out and what that means for the kinds of cities that we're working in now.
Yeah. So one is we work across the world on enabling small businesses for the digital world. So that's a big program we run across the world. I'll talk a bit more about the work we're doing with our cities and Lauren's team. So we came together in early 2020, eerily enough, just before the pandemic struck in Feb. And what we agreed was on two phases of program. So the first phase was, let's take South America, let's take 3 cities, including Guadalajara, and let's get close at a local level and solve for specific problems which could be solved through a digital initiative. And then in the next phase, take the program more global to the wider network of our cities, which is the phase we're getting into now. But what happened in phase 1 is we ran a process with 3 cities. So apart from Guadalajara, which Sergio talked about, and the transport problem, we also worked with Salvador and Quito. And we did 3 different things in all those places, which I'll talk about, over the first year of the program. And that was a really, really good experience because it was very hands-on. The cities gave us the problem, so it came from the city. And our city's team and the Visa team we have a very strong innovation muscle in the business. So we brought our innovation people out to work on these programs. So we basically took on three challenges. So one which came from Guadalajara, which Sergio talked about, was how do you make public transportation more efficient? We all know the link between public transport and sustainability. You grow public transport, the cities are greener, it gives more access, it gives people more mobility. But one of the key components of that is digital payments. And the more you make the transportation efficient from a digital payment perspective, it makes the experience not just for locals but tourists much more efficient. It reduces the cost for the transport system. I mean, I was buying coffee here in the morning, and anybody who was paying by cash took 5 minutes to buy a coffee versus people who are using more digital payments. And imagine doing that in a rush hour traffic of people trying to buy tickets by cash. So I think, sorry about that. So in Guadalajara, the problem was how do we build digital payments in an open loop way and make the whole public transport more efficient, which is a whole bunch of different operators, and it just helps stitch up all the transportation together. So that was problem number one. And that was a great program we came up with. In Quito, which is a city of small businesses, really. I mean, it's a beautiful city and like full of small businesses. And and what we did there was to enable those small businesses for the digital world. And the program took two, three initiatives there, but the key one was around giving them digital tools, which gave them ability to take their business digital, but also gave them tools to do simple things like managing inventories, doing basic accounting. And that just helped them massively from a financial inclusion perspective as well, because then it got them access into the banking system and credit and all those things which follow. But it just made them more fit for purpose and helped them grow the business massively. So that was the second program. The third one was in Salvador, which was more around digital education, which is where we set up a digital school to give IT skills, both to people who got employed subsequently and also for entrepreneurs who wanted to set up businesses. And there was also interesting digital consultant training who would then work with small businesses to train them better. So all these programs launched, and they're all sustainable in the sense that they will continue for a long time. Like the one in Salvador will be funded by companies who will then hire from these digital schools. So sustainability is built into the design. Even if Visa plays a lower role, other companies are stepping in. So the idea was to build more sustainable, scalable programs. Now, what we're doing with Resilient Cities is, so what does the next phase of program look like? So how do we share learnings with all 100 cities and beyond, but then also take another set of cities and solve problems together with them? So that's the stage we are in, Stuart.
And I think it bears repeating that this was all during COVID, right?
Yes.
So there's lessons there as well, right?
Yes.
Like, what did it do for that?
Yeah, the whole program was actually run during COVID, and Zoom and team calls and working with the cities, the team it worked out really well actually. And all said and done, the programs were effective because the results were measurable, and the teams just found a good way to work together, which didn't look easy at all. But we're pretty pleased the way it worked out. Again, digital tools helped in doing that.
For the work itself and for the sustainability of the long-term work with the businesses and the governments. That's amazing. So, Lauren, I'll turn to you for a second. In terms of the larger framing of the conference, the work of digitization and resilience, and the kinds of things that we've already seen with the program, how do you see this work relating to that larger space, and what does it mean for us building resilience as a network, but also for everyone that's here dealing with climate change issues?
Thanks, Stuart. I think this year's theme of COP, and I really thank the Egyptian presidency for bringing this to the fore, is an extremely practical theme, right? This together for implementation. I consider myself perhaps still a young leader, or at least on the borderline of still being a young leader. But even for myself, I've been attending the climate conferences since Copenhagen and COP16. And what's very clear is that we have we have talked a lot, we have negotiated a lot, and we still must, because there are a lot of issues that have not been resolved in terms of loss and damage and payment for adaptation. At the same time, we can't wait. We have to be implementing with all the tools in our toolboxes from today. So the fact that the Egyptian presidency has brought together this theme of being together for implementation really emphasizes that where we have laid the groundwork, we have to act. And I love Sergio's metaphor of living in the future, because I think for all of us, in terms of climate change, we are now living in that climate future. When we started the conversations about climate and climate modeling and the impacts that we might see in terms of storms, floods, extreme heat, these seem like things that were going to happen far in the future, but they're not. Right? The past summer, what we saw across Europe and North America in terms of extreme heat was unprecedented. What we saw in terms of the floods in Pakistan was at an enormous scale. So we are living in that future. Now, what's exciting, as well as daunting in some ways, is that we do have a lot of the tools we need to manage that future better. And I think that's what's very exciting about the partnership that we have with Visa, because it's actually a partnership about taking that groundwork and putting a process in place that allows cities and the private sector to work together properly. And I'm going to take a phrase that was used by my co-leader of the Resilient Cities delegation, the council leader of Glasgow. She said, nation states pledge, but cities deliver. And we know this. We know that, as we said, 75% of emissions are coming from cities, 70% of the population in 2050 will be in cities. We know this. We know that cities are the place to achieve both speed and scale. So when we talk about being together for implementation, what we have to do is continue to strengthen our policies that come from the national level that make those pledges and set those goals. I think Dr. Mona said it well. Digitization is not a luxury. It's a necessity for the economy. So we have to set those frameworks at the national level and then strengthen our ability to implement at the city level. This is where we deliver. And what we've been able to do with Visa is to look specifically at the resilience challenges and opportunities in a given city and say, how can we deliver for multiple benefits? The Mi Movilidad in Jalisco is so exciting because it's an economic solution, it's a transport solution, it encourages people to use public transport, and that brings down emissions. So it's a climate solution. So this is what we have to aim for. We have limited resources, and we certainly have limited time because we're living in the future. So we have to actually now bring all of our tools to bear and be together for implementation.
Great, and that's a great segue to you, Dr. Mona, because one of the things you started to touch on that I think is really important and interesting for this group and the larger conversation, and that is, how do you bring cities to the national government and use digitization to do and kind of fold out the plans that you're working on, and how does that reinforce what you're doing? So if you would just elaborate on some of those things that you're doing and how you bring the cities to that national agenda, and one that you've set for the whole conference, actually, that we have to take forward.
Well, thank you. All I've been listening to is music to my ears, which means that we're totally aligned. This is very promising. Well, if we're talking about Ministry of Planning, I would say our work is divided between planning, putting the plan itself, then allocating the needed funds, whether from the public funds or with partnerships, and then there's the implementation phase, and there's monitoring and evaluation. And each of these phases, we are adopting a bottom-up approach, and this is what the ministry is working on. So we are where we're making sure that development is planned, implemented, and getting funds, and thus being able to monitor is being on the local level, starting from villages, cities, and the governorates, and coming up to the national level as a whole. So we have been doing several things in this regard. I think the most famous and everyone knows about the Haya Karima, or the decent life that Egypt is adopting, where we're targeting the most vulnerable villages with a huge amount of funds reaching around around 800 billion Egyptian pounds, which covers around 58% of the population. We're talking about more than 4,500 villages across Egypt. And now we're not only targeting infrastructure interventions, but rather improving livelihoods, better access to services, and each of these pillars needs digitalization embedded within. At another stage, we're now taking the climate sensitive approach in the interventions that we are doing in Haya Karima. And by the way, tomorrow, this initiative is being upgraded to be on the African level. So the ministry is launching A Decent Life for a Climate Resilient Africa, targeting the most vulnerable villages across African countries, where several African countries are being joining this initiative. We're replicating the success story that we are witnessing for the Egyptian case. On the side of data, or how do I make sure that things are being monitored and evaluation and make sure that I'm on the right path, Egypt has launched 27 reports reporting on each and every SDGs, which SDG 11, of course, related to resilient cities is there, covering the 27 governorates. And we have taken it a step further, advising on a data dashboard for localization, where we are monitoring in a user-friendly and an interactive manner how all governorates are performing with regard to all SDGs. This is a platform that will enable and enforce better data-driven and evidence-based interventions by all stakeholders involved in the planning for development. I guess one more point that I would like to refer to is that we also designing a dashboard where it's called Partnerships for Development. So private sector, NGOs, or whatever entities that are working on sustainability and development can just plug in and see what projects is the government doing in cities and in governorates, and how they could contribute to further enhancement of the development in these areas. So I guess the ministry, particularly because this is our portfolio, and the government as a whole is taking localization very seriously, and we're targeting presenting voluntary local reports in the coming the name just slipped out of my mind. The high-level political forum next year. We're going with around from 2 to 3 governorates presenting their success stories, as well as their bottlenecks and challenges that they are facing on the local level. Thank you.
That's fascinating because, as Sergio said, we're living in the future, and the cities are growing, and there's more to do. But we also have a lot to make up, and digitization potentially moves us faster to getting to resilience building and to sort of the pre-recovery rather than recovery, and being able to do that together. Sergio, you talked about what you've already done with Visa and Resilient Cities Network. What if we were talking to a mayor, or you were talking to any member of the audience, what would be the first thing that you would recommend, or what would you recommend as the path to begin this process, to do this work?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Gracias.
It's difficult to have this big part of the.
We've all become uncomfortable together.
No, that is a good sound. Well, it's. I think it's very important that, like I told you, it's important to have a clear planning where we want to go. In Jalisco, we have a strategy of climate change that includes resilience and mitigation. And in metropolitan area, we have a climate change action plan in metropolitan area that permit us to look thoroughly where we are going in this agenda. And digitalization is very important. Jalisco start their digitalization strategy in this administration very strong, and we developed one of the most important programs, of the digitalization with Red Jalisco is a shared infrastructure to amplify the high velocity internet coverage to get to the very last corner or territory and minimize digital gap by strengthening digital capacity to connect school, health centers, cultural places, tourist corridors, and of course, public buildings. That is very important to have this kind of infrastructure. If not, it's very difficult to have digitalization of education, for example. Jalisco have a very important example of digitalization of vaccine for COVID. And that was very useful to have this strategy of digitalization. And it's not only for transport, it's useful for all the activities to give the people more capacity to be prepared for the context where we are living now. And for example, we have a very important system of visor urbano, for example, that is permit the 35 municipality for Jalisco to have developed a digital platform that helps citizens to make easier the emissions of permits for business and building totally online, for example. Now, another theme is land use system decision making process is with Mapa Jalisco that permit us to assure the planning use land in all the territory or the state, to apply it in forest fire data analysis, because it's a problem that we have and affect the cities because forest fire generate a bad pollution, a high pollution condition for cities. And I think the most important is to assure to have from the general aspects of digitalization to create the enabling conditions to develop projects like Visa. If it not, it's very difficult to do it. If we don't have all digitalization payment for transport, it's not possible to have a credit card payment in an open payment system. And I think it's very important. But one thing is we can have to take in account is to reduce the cost for the people. So the poorest people with the digitalization normally have to pay for the services. And that's very important to reduce this cost for the people that don't have the condition to pay. And it's a very strong challenge for a system like Visa that have a charge in the using of credit cards, but not everybody have this possibility. And the state have to develop conditions to the access on digital payment for the people that don't have the possibility to pay with a credit card. That's very important to have this whole vision to act in different aspects with successfully projects.
Thank you. And Rajiv and Lauren both, we talked in some of the preparations about, and Lauren mentioned, equity being so key in resilience, and how digitization, in your view, especially of how people thrive. What's your view on thinking forward, the combination of resilience, digitization, small business, and what that means for the kinds of plans that they're talking about? What does that mean for other cities? How do we plan this together if we're all sitting around a table? Because really, if there's not access, you can't really use digitization or build resilience, right? So you have to have access and equity. How does, and this is a question really for both of you in some ways, like how does Visa take this to the next level? Because small business often is livelihood, right, in lots of places, but there's a greater context with the city. So how do we take it to the next step? What is that next piece? And I would go from you to Lauren on that, because I think this is where the combination is really important.
Yeah. No, and Sergio made some great points around access and equity. I think for us, there are loads of small businesses, and most economies have a very high share of the economy which goes through small businesses, even the most developed ones. So that's a given. What we saw through COVID, and again, just to make the same point again, is that they were just not able to be in business anymore, because if you didn't accept uh, cards or digital payments, and people are not using cash, you are not in business anymore. If you didn't have a digital storefront, you were not in business anymore. So the first thing is like to be in business. You just need to be digitally enabled to just be able to compete and have a presence out there. So that's the first part of it. What it also does, like in case of Jalisco, is in terms of equity. What happens is in a lot of payment systems, people load their cards or load tickets, and the money is locked. But when you have more open loop payments, you just use it every time. So you're only spending as much money as is needed for each journey. So it does have an impact on how the financial aspects matter to people. So there is that advantage which comes with it. And three, it does save a lot of costs for the governments, because if you think about the public transport systems, you suddenly don't have to have those ticketing systems and counters and help desks and manage cash and all of that. It just takes away that pain out. So you can invest that money better, you can bring the prices down, or whatever form it takes. So it does help with that agenda as well.
Sure. And before
So,
Lauren jumps in,
yeah.
we should be clear that when small businesses aren't functioning, that probably means that government is having a harder time, education systems are having a harder time, and
Yeah.
without digitization, we saw very quickly that we could not connect to each other, right? So business storefronts is one thing. Being able to tap into your school system and having access to computers and digitization is another. So I think one of the things it brings up for the resilience sphere is how do we get those co-benefits, access, and equity in something that looks towards the future?
Thanks, Stuart. I think in some ways the answer was in the question, right? The future looks like maximizing the benefits of these new systems that we're putting in place. And Sergio spoke to it so perfectly, because with putting the payment system in Jalisco in a way that's tied to public transport, you're removing that barrier of entry, right? You're taking down that barrier to getting a credit card, to having to have a credit history and everything that comes with that, and making small payments and digitized small payments accessible to masses and to people who probably haven't had the opportunity to have a kind of a digital or a mobile payment before. So taking away that first barrier is essential. Then what do you do with that in the future? How do you take it from that 0 to 1 and then go from 1 to 10? And I think that some of the ingredients for that are already baked in to the way we've been thinking about this program with Visa. And Rajiv talked about the difference between the programs in the different cities. I think when you look at what's possible, a combination almost of what we've seen in Jalisco, in Quito, and in Salvador is really interesting, because in Jalisco, we looked at public transport using digitization. In Quito, we were looking at how we connect small businesses and market opportunities. And in Salvador, you have a skill building program. And that skill building program, I also want to say, was really focused on getting minority and women entrepreneurs into that program. So this was about being inclusive. This was about addressing the needs of the most vulnerable in the community. Because one of the co-benefits that we see when businesses come online and when we use digital tools is that you don't have to leave the house necessarily to run your business. You don't have to choose between taking care of your family, whether you're a man or a woman. You don't have to choose between taking care of your family or your aging parents or your young children and actually delivering a sustainable livelihood and being that person that your family can depend on. So it creates a tremendous amount of economic and social resilience to bring these tools in with a conscious view to doing it in a holistic way. So I think that combination of looking at the public systems and the infrastructure that create an enabling environment, and then what the soft side is of this and this that a city needs to create equity, whether that's in small markets or whether that's actually creating a capacity building program. And maybe it's all of them. I think we have this opportunity to build with those building blocks and then really leap forward in terms of co-benefits.
Thank you. Dr. Mona, turning to you and thinking about it from the national perspective and also your 2030 agenda, all of those SDGs, you mentioned 11, but there are many of them, right? We're here really representing 17 because this is the partnership SDG on stage. But if you had to sort of translate what's being said about how we work at the very local level, you mentioned the villages and who's coming online. What does that mean for the climate ready Africa? How do you sort of translate into your 2030 goals and the SDGs that you mentioned this process of digitization even further, and what does that mean for your work for the next couple of years?
Well, that's a challenging question, but again, and let me quote what you said. The answer is in the question in itself. It's in SDG 17. Partnerships is a very critical and vital element to make sure that digital transformation happens from the local and the villages level and up to the national level. I just wanted to spot maybe some aspects for digital transformation that have been taken care of very in a very precise way when we were drafting the update of the Vision 2030. What's related also to digital education and access to digital services. Now, each and every initiative that's being designed for on the national level, and again we always start bottom-up approach, so we are designing for local level at first. It must have an aspect of eliminating any kinds of digital divides, whether regionally or by gender. So when we're targeting programs for women, we make sure that digital illiteracy is being dealt with, and awareness of how digital transformation could be a very important element in transforming the lives of all and making sure that livelihood, part of your well-being and better livelihoods, is to have access to digital services. So again, what I'm saying is that SDG 17 is which accentuates the importance of revitalizing multi-stakeholder engagement and support, where we need the private sector to be a very vital partner in sharing knowledge, expertise, technology for the achievements of the SDGs. From the government side, I guess what we have to work on very seriously is for the enabling and business environment for the private sector and the conditions in which the private sector projects will be done, and make sure that it can attract more investments across the ICT sector. Just on another note, I'm just trying to use this good opportunity, is that the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development is supporting the organization of the Solutions Day on the 17th. Now, coming at the conclusion of the COP, it was quite challenging. It's the last day, but again, I think it is the most important day. It provides a platform for exchanging all kinds of thoughts, lessons learned, and trying to forge innovative solutions for a better future for all, and acting together to bring life our vision and what you have said of an implementation COP, rather than talking about pledges and aspirations. Now, the Solutions Day is composed of 5 sub-themes. 3 of them are very much related to what we have been discussing all over this session: sustainable cities, private sector and entrepreneurship engagement, ICT innovation and technology. And this recognizes the importance of these 3 pillars and main elements in climate action. So I just grasp this opportunity and invite you all to join us so that we can make use of your valuable insights on identifying realistic but rather ambitious solutions to make cities resilient with the enabling power of digitalization. And here I quote my colleague who just wrote to me this nice slogan: "Now it's time to move forward, guided by lessons learned." Thank you.
And I think we're hearing some lessons on stage right now as well. I wanted to check and see if there's any questions from the audience, because I can come back for a bit more dialogue here. We have a few more minutes that we can take. Anyone in the audience, not to put anybody on the spot, but any questions? I'm looking at you, Ilya. No, I'm kidding.
So in the digital transformation, part of shocks and stresses, how do you maintain that equality after a shock or stress? Because the infrastructure that's necessary to build that out is not simple. And what is the plan for that? And does that support local economies, local jobs, and local training in that technical aspect? Because I think that's an important piece of this. And the second follow-up to that is, I heard a piece of this and I want to understand what the microfinancing, does this actually, digital transformation, unlock microfinancing so I can start businesses? And I work in a lot of the developing world that doesn't have banking and finance. And so when you get to this kind of transformation, how does that begin to start that piece in those communities? Thanks.
It's for me. It's for me. It's for me.
It's really for all of you. Yeah, you can start. Go ahead, Dr. Mona. Go ahead.
Well, we're not. I just want to make sure that I understood your question. If you're talking about financing and making sure that you have allocated funds for working on more resilient infrastructure in the face of shocks, and on the other side, how to rebound again if there is some kind of risks or shocks that we can rebound. I guess if we talk practically, and this is what happened as when COVID struck the world, it was how can I say, it was a game changer. It was a real shock that everyone was not knowing what will be happening tomorrow, and we were shocked as an emerging country or a developing country maybe, that we were able to strive and we were able to face that because we had maybe measures that we thought were just luxurious one or just complementary measures, although the COVID showed that being prepared for shocks and making sure that what you design in policies are resilient rather than robust. No, I'm not talking about robustness now, I'm talking about resilience given the momentum that the world is working on. And again, if I'm talking about the mandate of the ministry where we put the strategy, that's why we felt that the Vision 2030 needs to be revisited. There are no one-way solutions to anything. You have to have resilience, you have to cope with changing circumstances, any kind of shocks, you have to be prepared, and this should be embedded within the sectoral strategies themselves. Each and every sector should be accommodated to do that. Yes, thank you.
So who wants to pick that up as well? Go ahead, Rajit or Lauren.
I'll be very brief. And I think I just wanted to complement what Dr. Mona said, which is that it's bringing the frameworks from the national planning into the sectoral planning. And then I think part of the question was about training. And so I think this is a really important aspect where you can build in those frameworks that have multiple benefits into the way you're training your public sector, but also into the way you're training professionals in different trades and businesses. Because resilience is a mindset, but it's a mindset that you can make very practical by creating frameworks that ask the questions about achieving those multiple benefits and about creating that infrastructure. And I think the other questions on the finance and the microfinance, I'm going to leave for Pisa.
Yeah, I just wanted to take the question on the resilience of the infrastructure. Can you hear me? Yeah. So that's the one a company like us really obsesses over, because so many people are dependent on our infrastructure that it should never go down. So we have a goal of operating our system at like what we call 5 nines. It's like 99.999 availability, which means we don't go down. We also live in a world with massive cybersecurity risk. So when you design a city for resilience with a dependence on the digital infrastructure, to your point, you do need to have those goals in mind, that there are bad actors and the systems have to work all the time because the whole economy depends on it. So we do obsess over that a lot. So we create multiple layers of backups, and if one goes down, the other kicks in. And it's a whole thing. So it's an important thing to keep in mind that the operational resilience and security, especially for designing resilience, is a very, very important aspect.
Yeah, and we talk about building in resilience value, and we're getting better at talking about, and this answers the question a little bit, like it takes time to begin to not just have a return on investment, but to have a return on resilience value means that you're preventing more of those things from happening. Humans are terrible about paying ahead of time for things not to happen. So it's a difficult question. Sir, do you want to add to any of the questions?
Okay. Agree.
Okay, so in the last few minutes, I had put out a little bit of a challenge question for our wrap up, and that is, from each of you, what's the most important thing from your point of view that a government or the business or us together doing 17, the Resilient Cities Network and Visa and the cities and the national governments, what's the most important thing you can do moving forward in a kind of snapshot? So if we were to send this out to the world, and we are technically, what is that one thing that we do, and how do we carry this forward? And I think we'll go in this order as the way we started. So Rajiv, to you first.
I'll stay with the theme of Egypt hosting this conference. Is like action and partnership. It just needs a whole bunch of us to work together. That would be my call to action.
Great. Lauren?
I'll stay on the theme of implementation and say that, we have to stay the course. We have to consolidate those gains and build on the frameworks and be uncompromising about demanding those holistic resilience benefits so that our communities and our most vulnerable are served by the investments and innovation that are now driving, as they should, into the climate response.
Right. Dr. Mona?
Well, I think I touched upon that in the concluding words that I've said, but I just to reiterate again, being informed or information is an asset. If I have data that is as clear and precise and reliable as much as possible, this would enable a better informative or a better design of policies, and thus targeting, and thus I guess we would reach the way where we are more resilient and everyone is engaged. So engagement and well-informed systems is the key to reaching resilience, I guess.
Right. Sergio?
Well, I think in continue this using data is very important. We have a lot of data in universities, in different sectors, but not always is available, this data. And we have to create information information services that with digitalization. For example, with air quality in a city, if you have a good data system with predictive quality air condition before that appear with this data, and you put in a system that is accessible to the people, that permit us to give information for the citizens to be done, receive damage about pollution. And that's very important to have this kind of condition, and digitalization is very important to have this kind of services for the people. And of course, the digitalization and use of services of banking people to sell to small businesses, to have access to credit, the chief mothers and family chief mothers that normally don't have access to credit. It's very important to have this kind of skills and tools to develop.
Right. So I think we almost heard a formula there: action, implementation, information, and then the data and the skills. And to me, that feels like where we started with how do we bring digitization and resilience back together in cities and in nation states. So I want to really thank everybody, thank Visa for the partnership, thank our guests and panelists for really making this a great conversation today, and looking forward to continuing it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. I wanted to keep it.
Yes, this is good, good dialogue.
Although I really wanted to everything you're doing in